Welcome to the Simply Pediatrics Podcast, simplifying holistic healthcare for infants and children. We're so glad you're here. Join Jennifer Zethner, holistic pediatric nurse practitioner and holistic mom of 3 on a mission. Listen in as she shares the answers to the most asked questions from parents in her practice every day and offers parents practical strategies and actionable steps to support their child's health and well-being. Enjoy this insightful episode of the Simply Pediatrics Podcast and stay tuned for more information at the end of the podcast. Today's episode, Skip the Fruit, a baby's first food.
Hello and welcome. I'm so happy to be here with you today. Today we're going to talk about why I do not recommend fruit and cereal for a baby's first food. So cereal's easy. I'm going to tell you that, just easy, one sentence really. It is just a gluey processed grain. I wouldn't eat it myself. I'm not going to feed it to my baby. So that's it in regard to cereal. Fruit is much more complicated as to why I don't think it's optimal as the first foods for your infant. You know, it's kind of part of our standard American diet. Sweet foods and carbs is really like the mainstay of our children's breakfast foods to start with, and our baby's first foods. So one of the big reasons I do not recommend it in general as like an optimal food to start with is that it's raw. You know, our baby's guts are just going to be getting used to having food go in there, right? The baby was used to either your breast milk or formula, and now we're going to put some food in there. And in Chinese medicine, our stomach is like an oven. So if it's like an oven, it has to kind of heat up the food that goes in there. And if it's raw, it's got to work a bit harder. So we don't really want to put that kind of stress onto our digestive systems of our little ones. We want to put food in there that's warm and cooked to begin with. The next reason I don't recommend fruit to start with is because it is sweet. Now, I know it's the good sugar, but it's still more sweet than our little baby's mouths need. You know, the human mouth prefers sweet. And, you know, a baby will enjoy fruit because our taste buds like the sweetness of it. But then you're going to end up inevitably, I hear so often, is that they now won't take a vegetable unless it's with what? A fruit. And that's what's in a lot of the jars, right? The jars are mixes of meats and vegetables with a fruit, a vegetable with a fruit. And that's because the manufacturers know that our babies like sweet foods. So you don't want to start off with your baby already manipulating and getting them to eat. You want them to enjoy the process and head you in a direction of, you know, not having a picky eater that has to have something sweet to go along with their vegetable. The other interesting thing about fruit that you don't hear many people talk about, but I'm old enough to remember that there was a time where you couldn't get fruit all year long. You could only get the fruit that was in season in your part of the world. Now we live in a world in the United States where we can get any kind of fruit we want at any time of the year. And that doesn't mean that it's optimal for our bodies at that time of the year. You know, historically speaking, there was a reason why fruits come in, to be ripe during certain seasons. It's because our bodies need them. So when we just start ingesting fruit all year long, it's just not a necessary nutrient in our bodies in general, even for adults. So that's the other piece of the why I don't recommend fruits as a first foods, is because for the most part, the food that's available in your part of the world is probably limited depending on where you live. I mean, here in New York, we have apples and pears over winter, and that's really the only fruit that would be available to us that would be appropriate. The other thing with fruit is that it has to be pureed, right? You can't really give small pieces of cantaloupe and apple. It's too hard for an infant, for a baby, for a 6-month-old. So you have to take that fruit and you have to puree it. And what happens when you puree a food? You get a really large volume. You know, if you take an apple and puree it, your 6-month-old, 7-month-old will probably eat all of it. But that doesn't mean that they should be. That's entirely too much actually on their bellies. You know, I recommend fruit when children have a full mouth of teeth. And the reason I recommend that is because once they have a full mouth of teeth, teeth in their mouth, they can adequately bite onto a grape, onto a pineapple. They won't overindulge because it takes a few moments, right? They can enjoy chewing it and having small pieces and not overindulging in it. And so once they are about 1 year old or so, you can start introducing those smaller pieces of fruit. Before that, to puree it is way too much volume. One side note in regard to, another reason why I don't recommend fruit. Almost every baby food, book I see, any website, what are the 2 foods that they recommend that you give to your baby first? Avocado and banana. Avocado and banana are fruit. So first of all, avocado is actually a fruit. Very hard to break down. Both of those foods can slow digestion, which looks like constipation or just not having regular bowel movements. Very tricky to break down both of those foods. And I know they're the first foods listed in a lot of the websites and a lot of the books. And the reason for that, I assume, is because those foods, banana and avocado, are like the right texture because they're so soft. But just because it's the right texture does not mean it should be the first food for your baby. In fact, those are the 2 foods I pull out of people's diets. Like, go slow. Once your child is old enough to eat fruit adequately with a mouthful of their teeth, they still shouldn't consume a whole banana. It will cause constipation. The same thing with an avocado. We go slow with those. So those 2 foods particularly, I would not be encouraging your baby to have as their first foods. A final word about fruit is that our jars and pouches, the majority of the jars and pouches contain fruit. And even if it's an organic jar or pouch, they get recalled so frequently. So moms and dads, do the best you can to avoid those. Feed them table food, but try to avoid the jars and pouches. If you are going to use them, don't use the same brand. They do get recalled very frequently. So what is the first food I do encourage you to give your baby? Vegetables. And I go into this a lot in my podcast about first foods. If you want more information, you can head over to that podcast to hear me talk more about first foods and vegetables as that first food. But this is just information for you families out there that are like, why does Nurse Jennie say no fruit to begin with? And these are some of my reasons. All right, remember, parenting is a journey and you're doing an amazing job. Stay curious and keep learning, and I'll see you next time.
Thank you for joining Jennie on the Simply Pediatrics Podcast. We hope that the valuable information she shared in this episode will inspire and empower you on your holistic parenting journey. If you would like to learn more about Jennie, her Simply Pediatrics practice, or anything that she spoke about today, please check the show notes that accompany this podcast and you'll find all the links and resources you need. You can also sign up for the Simply Pediatrics mailing list so that you receive Jennie's weekly newsletters packed with vital information and holistic parenting journeys. If you've enjoyed today's episode, please consider giving this page a like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any episodes. And don't forget to connect with us by sharing your thoughts in the comments section below. Follow Simply Pediatrics on any and all of the social media platforms. And if you're interested in an in-person or a virtual appointment with Jennie, please see the contact details in the show notes. Stay tuned for more episodes packed with a wealth of powerful information to support you on your holistic parenting path. See you next time.